The golden glow of candlelight flickered softly over the Christmas dinner table, casting a warmth that wrapped around the room like a familiar embrace. Clara Montgomery sat at the head of the table in her home, the place where so many memories had been made, and where tonight, she hoped, joy would once again reign. The scent of cinnamon and roasted turkey filled the air, mingling with the soft hum of family chatter. It was Christmas, after all, a time for celebration, togetherness, and love. Clara smiled gently, her eyes resting on the faces of her children and grandchildren, her heart swelling with the love they had always shared. But as she looked around the table, something didn't feel right. Her gaze shifted to Sophia Montgomery, her daughter-in-law, who sat beside her son Ethan Montgomery. Sophia, 5 months pregnant, looked radiant, her brown hair falling in perfect waves, her dress a form-fitting peach-colored number that made her glow. But there was something in her eyes, something cold, a subtle shift in her demeanor that Clara couldn't quite place. It was as if she were holding something back, something sharp, ready to be unleashed. Clara's senses sharpened. She had learned to trust her instincts, especially after all these years of raising Ethan on her own. The warmth of the evening, the laughter that usually filled the room, seemed to dampen as Sophia's eyes lingered on Clara. There was an edge to her presence, something that didn't quite belong in the festive air of Christmas. As Clara watched, her son, Ethan, smiled at Sophia with that proud, adoring look he often wore around her. His love for Sophia was undeniable, but it had changed him. He wasn't the same man who had once leaned on Clara through thick and thin. Clara's thoughts drifted to the moments when it was just the two of them, when they shared laughter over burnt dinners and struggled together, side by side. Now, her son's gaze toward her was distant, almost indifferent. And then it happened. Sophia stood, her movement deliberate, as though she knew the attention of the entire room would fall to her. The clinking of her glass against her spoon cut through the air, silencing the conversation. Even the children running around the living room paused, their innocence unaware of the tension building. Sophia smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her hand rested gently on her pregnant belly, the future she was now carrying. "Family," she began, her voice firm and clear, a tone that commanded attention. "Today is special, not just because of Christmas, but because Ethan and I have made an important decision." Clara's stomach tightened. She could feel the weight of the moment, something ominous in the air that she couldn't shake. Her instincts told her this was no ordinary announcement. This wasn't about the baby, not entirely. There was something else, something deeper. Sophia paused, letting the silence linger. The atmosphere seemed to hold its breath. "Ethan and I have been talking," she continued, her eyes scanning the room, "and we've decided that from now on, I will be managing all the finances for this family." The words hit Clara like a slap in the face. The warmth of Christmas, the laughter, the togetherness, everything felt like it had suddenly been covered in a cold, thick blanket. Sophia's voice carried on, but Clara's mind was racing. She had heard those words but couldn't quite process them. It wasn't the announcement that shocked her. It was the ease with which Sophia claimed control, the lack of hesitation as if this was her right. Clara's heart sank. She looked at Ethan, who nodded beside her with that serious, almost distant expression, the same expression he wore when he thought he was doing something right. He didn't even look at her. Not really. Sophia's smile deepened. "And Clara," she said, turning to Clara with a faux sweetness, "I canceled your credit card this morning. Ethan and I thought it would be better this way. You don't need to worry about expenses anymore. We'll take care of everything." Clara froze. For a split second, the room was suspended in time, her breath caught in her chest. The words echoed in her ears like a hollow drum, but she didn't react. Not yet. The table was silent, the only sound coming from the crackling fire in the hearth. Clara's gaze locked with Ethan's, her son's eyes wide with shock, but there was no apology in them, no understanding. Just the same adoration for Sophia that had always been there, growing, ever since she entered their lives. Clara took a slow, deliberate breath. She placed her glass down carefully on the table, the sound of crystal against wood ringing louder than she expected. Every eye turned toward her, waiting for her reaction. Sophia remained standing, her posture proud, her gaze expectant, as though she were waiting for Clara to crumble, to beg, to break. Instead, Clara did the opposite. She smiled, a calm, almost sweet smile. The smile of someone who knew something the others didn't. The smile of a woman who had seen too much, who had fought too many battles to let this one bring her to her knees. Slowly, Clara stood up. Her knees protested, but she ignored them. She stood tall, straightening her shoulders as if the years had not worn her down. She looked directly into Ethan's eyes, the eyes that once held nothing but love for her. Now they were clouded with something else, something she couldn't place. "Son," she said softly, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "You really don't know, do you?" Ethan blinked, his smile faltering. He opened his mouth, but no words came out at first. The silence stretched thick and heavy. Finally, he spoke, his voice uncertain. "Know what, Mom?" Sophia stepped forward, her nervousness betraying her composure. "Now what?" she repeated, but this time her voice was tinged with panic. Clara didn't answer immediately. She just let the silence grow. Let the tension hang in the air like a storm waiting to break. She studied both of them, Ethan, her son, the one she had raised, and Sophia, the woman who had slowly but surely wormed her way into his life, into their world. In that moment, Clara knew that the truth was about to come crashing down. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had no idea what they had underestimated. The family was about to find out just how wrong they were. The room remained silent for a long, uneasy moment after Clara's words hung in the air. The festive mood that had once filled the space like warmth from a crackling fire now felt like it had evaporated, leaving behind a cold chill. The clinking of glasses, the laughter, the music, it all faded into the background, as though the world outside had been swallowed by the tension. Clara felt the weight of every gaze upon her, but it was Ethan Montgomery's eyes that held the most power. His shock, his confusion. The flicker of doubt that briefly passed through his face, it all tugged at her heart. The warmth she had once felt for him, the love that had defined her every sacrifice, suddenly seemed distant, as though a veil had descended between them. Sophia's words rang in her ears, growing louder with each passing second. "You don't need to worry about expenses anymore. We'll take care of everything." The chill that had crept in when Sophia spoke to her only deepened as Clara watched her son, her child, nod in agreement. She wanted to scream, to reach across the table and shake him awake. But she remained still, her hands clasped together tightly in front of her, her nails digging into her palms. Across the table, the reactions were mixed. Sarah and Michelle, Clara's sisters-in-law, exchanged looks that bordered on smug approval. They were the type to praise any decision that put the younger generation in control. "What a good idea, Sophia," Sarah said with a soft clap of her hands. "My mother-in-law should be doing the same. It's better for everyone, really." Clara's chest tightened, but she didn't flinch. Ethan's cousins smiled, their attention fleeting as they returned to their conversation, oblivious to the storm that was brewing. They had no idea what it felt like to be on the receiving end of this family's cruelty. And then there was Ethan, Clara's son, the boy she had raised alone after the death of her husband, the man who had at one point been her entire world, the one who, in his youth, had looked at her with adoration in his eyes, eyes that no longer seemed to know her. The look on his face now was one of pride, but also something colder. He didn't see her. He didn't understand her. Her heart cracked at the sight. Clara's mind drifted back to another Christmas, a simpler one. The year Ethan was 10, his father had passed just months before. The house had been small, a humble cottage on the outskirts of town. The Christmas tree had been modest, adorned with hand-me-down ornaments and popcorn garlands, but Ethan's face had lit up with the magic of it all. They had sat by the fire, eaten homemade pot pie, and laughed together. There had been no grand dinner, no expensive gifts. Just the two of them, finding joy in the small things. Michael, her husband, had been gone for 3 years, but the pain still lingered. It was a wound that never quite healed, but Clara had made it work. She had made it work for Ethan, always pushing forward, always protecting him from the weight of their loss. She had sacrificed everything for him, her comfort, her dreams, her own desires, all for him, to make sure he grew up strong, kind, and capable. But now, as Clara looked at Ethan, seated beside Sophia, the man who had once held her hand for comfort seemed a distant memory. This was no longer the boy who had run into her arms after a bad day at school. This was a man, a stranger, lost in a world where Sophia seemed to have claimed him entirely. The mother he had once known, the mother who had guided him, had been replaced by someone who wasn't his mother at all. Someone who manipulated, controlled, and quietly shattered the world she had built. The pain Clara felt wasn't rage, not yet. It was deeper than that. It was the slow, suffocating realization that she was no longer needed. That the son she had raised, the son who once needed her, had grown into a man who no longer understood her. Sophia had planted seeds of doubt. She had slowly and methodically turned Ethan against her, weaving a story of control, efficiency, and a future of better management for their family. But in Clara's eyes, it wasn't about better management. It was about ownership, about Sophia's desire to control everything, even Ethan's relationship with her. A small part of Clara wanted to plead, to beg Ethan to remember her, to ask him, desperately, if he could see the woman who had once been everything to him. But she kept it all inside. She would not beg. She would not be reduced to a victim, not even now. She had spent too many years as a widow, as a single mother, as a businesswoman building her empire from the ground up, to let this happen now. "Are you okay, Mom?" Ethan's voice cut through the fog of her thoughts. He was looking at her now, genuinely concerned, but with that same disconnection. It was as if he was talking to a stranger. Clara gave him a soft, reassuring smile. "I'm fine, darling, I'm fine." But inside, she was breaking. She had built so much, given so much, and now it all felt like it was slipping away, piece by piece, like sand through her fingers. Sophia's eyes narrowed as she watched their exchange, a subtle but calculating glint in her gaze. She could see the cracks forming, and she wouldn't stop until she had control. She had already won Ethan's heart, and now she was working on winning his mind, too. The dinner continued, but Clara felt every minute like an eternity. She was no longer a participant in her own life. She was a spectator, watching as the family she had built, the family she had fought for, was slowly being dismantled before her very eyes. But this was just the beginning. Clara would not go quietly. She had fought too hard for too long. And this time things would change. She would fight and she would win, for herself, for Ethan, and for the future she had built, even if no one else knew it yet. As Clara sat quietly at the head of the table, the sound of laughter and conversation around her seemed distant, muffled by the weight of the past pressing down on her shoulders. Her mind wandered back to a time when the world felt far more uncertain, but also full of possibility. She closed her eyes for a moment, the warmth of the candlelight flickering softly over the family gathering, but the memories were far colder. It was the winter of 1985 when everything changed. Clara had just turned 30, and her world was thrown into chaos. Michael, her beloved husband, had died in a car accident, leaving her to raise their young son, Ethan, alone. The funeral was a blur, a gray sky, the cold wind biting at her cheeks, the weight of grief heavy in her chest. She had stood beside his grave, clutching her swollen belly, 7 months pregnant with Ethan at the time, feeling as if the ground beneath her would swallow her whole. The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and frantic worry. The bills piled up. The house payment, the utilities, and the ever-growing debts from Michael's failing business had all been left behind like shadows in the wake of his death. Clara had never been a woman who relied on anyone. She had always been independent, fiercely proud of her ability to take care of herself. But now, with the world crumbling around her, she was forced to face the reality that she could barely make ends meet. Her days were spent sewing, hemming pants for neighbors, fixing zippers for people in town, and taking whatever odd job she could find. The money barely covered the basics. There were nights when she ate only beans and bread, just to make sure Ethan had enough to eat. The bills, the pressure, the overwhelming fear, every day felt like a battle just to survive. But through it all, Clara held on. Her hands, tired and worn from years of sewing, were still capable of creating beauty. She began to teach herself new skills, new techniques. She sewed dresses, bridal gowns, and even costumes for the local theater productions. There was always a need for her work, and she began to build a reputation. But it wasn't enough, not yet. Clara remembered the day she met Mrs. Stella Vanderbilt, an elegant woman who lived in a mansion on the outskirts of town. It had started as just another job, fixing a dress for a woman who had more money than Clara could imagine. But as she worked, Mrs. Vanderbilt saw something in her, a raw talent, a fierce ambition that could not be ignored. One afternoon, after Clara had finished her work, Mrs. Vanderbilt invited her to sit with her for tea. "Clara, my dear," Mrs. Vanderbilt had said with a sharp, assessing gaze, "you have a gift, but a gift without strategy is just wasted potential. You've got to learn how to turn that talent into something more." Those words, those few simple words, had changed everything for Clara. Mrs. Vanderbilt didn't just teach her the technicalities of business. She taught her how to think like a businesswoman. Profit margins, client relations, the importance of valuing her time, lessons that Clara had never considered before. She helped Clara secure a loan, a small one at first, to buy better equipment, better materials, and to open a small workshop. Clara had built a foundation, but it was the beginning of a long journey that would demand everything from her, every ounce of her energy, every waking moment. Years passed, and Clara's business, Montgomery Couture, grew steadily. She hired 2 women from the neighborhood, teaching them the skills that Mrs. Vanderbilt had taught her. Together, they worked day and night, sewing wedding dresses, prom gowns, and specialty items for the wealthy women who populated the town. Clara poured everything she had into the business, the long hours, the late nights, the constant sacrifices. She lived simply, never indulging, always saving. And she kept Ethan by her side through it all. When Ethan was born, Clara had promised him something. She had promised him a life free from the struggles she had known. He would never have to worry about money, never have to scrape by. But more importantly, Clara didn't want him to ever forget the value of hard work, the sacrifice, the determination, the grit that had gotten them to where they were. She never told him the full truth of how she had built their life, how she had secretly bought properties, invested in businesses, and turned her modest seamstress job into a small empire. She didn't want him to know, not because she was ashamed, but because she didn't want him to take anything for granted. She wanted him to grow up understanding that nothing worth having came easy. When he went off to college, Clara worked even harder to ensure he never saw the weight she carried. She paid for his tuition in full, though she told him it was a scholarship. She didn't want him to think she was anything more than the struggling mother he had always known. She kept the secret for years, watching him grow, watching him become the man she had always hoped he would be. But then, Sophia entered their lives. Clara could still remember the first time she met Sophia. It was at a corporate event, a gathering for the company where Ethan had started working after graduation. She had been introduced as Ethan's girlfriend, but Clara had sensed something was off from the very beginning. There was a sharpness to Sophia, a calculated energy that Clara didn't trust. Sophia had a perfect smile, a perfect outfit, and a perfect life, but Clara saw through it. She saw the cracks in the facade, the way Sophia's eyes would quickly evaluate the room, the people, the objects, everything around her. It was the look of someone who was always calculating. What can I get from this? How can I use this? And it wasn't just the superficial things that Clara noticed. It was the way Sophia spoke to Ethan, the way she subtly undermined Clara's influence. At first, it was small things. Ethan started spending more money on clothes, more than he could afford. Sophia would make comments about how he should invest in his image, or how he should start thinking about the future. Clara had watched as her son, the same boy who had grown up with the values she instilled in him, slowly began to change. His decisions, his thoughts, were no longer his own. They were guided by Sophia's influence, and as she sat at the head of the table, watching her son now, she realized how much he had been affected by Sophia's manipulation. Sophia's arrival had disrupted the delicate balance Clara had worked so hard to create. The life she had built, the secrets she had kept, all seemed to be unraveling before her eyes. But Clara wasn't one to back down. She wouldn't let anyone take away what she had fought so hard to build. The question now was whether she could protect her son from the woman who seemed determined to tear their family apart. And so, with quiet strength, Clara resolved that she would do whatever it took to keep her family intact, to show Ethan who he really was, and to reclaim what was hers. The seeds of doubt had been planted, but Clara Montgomery was no stranger to the fight. She had built an empire from nothing. She could rebuild her family, too. Clara Montgomery had never been one for flash, never one to draw attention to herself, even when she had earned it. In fact, it was in the shadows of her small, modest home that she built her empire, an empire that no one knew about, not even Ethan. While the world around her saw only the seamstress, the woman who hemmed pants for a living, who smiled politely and never asked for more than what she needed, Clara was hard at work. She was building, quietly, relentlessly, in the spaces where others failed to look. It wasn't easy. There were days when the work seemed endless, long, grueling hours spent sewing wedding dresses by day and sifting through real estate listings and financial reports by night. Clara's sewing machine had become as much a part of her life as the air she breathed. It was more than just a tool for her. It was her lifeline, the one piece of her past that still anchored her in the chaos. But in the stillness of the night, when Ethan was fast asleep in the room across the hall, Clara would sit at her old wooden desk, the soft hum of the sewing machine in the background, and pore over the pages of investments and business plans. She was determined that she would never again be vulnerable, not like she had been after Michael's death. It had all started with small steps. Incremental risks. The sewing business, which had once only been about scraping by, became the stepping stone to something much larger. She had learned, through trial and error, the power of compounding investments. She started by buying old properties, nothing too extravagant, nothing that would attract attention, but properties in up-and-coming neighborhoods. She knew the value of $1, the importance of buying low and waiting for the market to grow. She studied the trends, the ebb and flow of real estate, with an intensity that consumed her. But it wasn't just about the properties. Clara was building something more. She wasn't just securing real estate for her future. She was positioning herself in a way that would ensure her son would never have to struggle the way she had. Every deal she made was a deliberate step forward, a calculated move that no one would see coming. To Ethan, she was still just the seamstress, his simple, hard-working mother who barely managed to pay the bills. He had no idea that the house he grew up in, the one he thought was the only home they had, was just one of many assets Clara had quietly accumulated. Clara's relationships in the business world were just as discreet as her investments. One of the few people who knew the true extent of her success was Dorothy Hamilton, a retired high society woman who had once hired Clara to alter a dress. Dorothy had recognized something in Clara that most people overlooked: drive, intelligence, and an ability to turn nothing into something. Dorothy had become both a mentor and a close confidant. She had taught Clara the importance of learning not just the craft of sewing, but the art of business. "Clara, my dear," Dorothy had once said, sitting across from her at the small kitchen table, sipping tea. "You have a gift, yes, but you must learn to think about what you're doing in the long run. It's not just about what you make, but about what you keep. Always keep a portion for yourself, invest it wisely, and don't be afraid of being bold." Clara had listened intently. She learned about profit margins, about the hidden world of commercial properties, about how to negotiate with suppliers and clients, about the power of smart investments. Dorothy had also introduced Clara to accountants, lawyers, and bankers who were more than willing to guide her, seeing potential in her that she hadn't even seen in herself. Dorothy had helped Clara understand that in the world of business, it wasn't just about hard work. It was about making your money work for you. It was Dorothy who had first encouraged Clara to expand her sewing business into something more substantial. With Dorothy's advice, Clara opened her first shop in a modest location. Nothing too flashy, but a steady stream of clients from the local community kept it afloat. Slowly but surely, Clara reinvested the profits from her sewing business into real estate. She bought small office buildings, storefronts, anything that seemed undervalued. In the early years, she didn't care about grandeur. She cared about generating income, no matter how small the amount. The real turning point came when Clara bought her first luxury apartment complex in the West End, a district that was beginning to see a surge in property values. She had been hesitant at first. Spending that kind of money seemed absurd. But Clara had done her research. The neighborhood was transforming, and she could feel it in her bones. With the money she had saved from her sewing business and a small loan from a bank she trusted, she secured the property. Within 5 years, It had tripled in value. By the time Ethan was in college, Clara's business empire was quietly thriving, but she never let him see it. She maintained the facade of the modest, struggling mother. She wanted Ethan to believe that he had earned everything on his own, that nothing was handed to him. She wanted him to learn the value of hard work, to understand that nothing worth having came without sacrifice. In fact, when Ethan asked her about money, Clara would always change the subject or make light of it. "Oh, don't worry about me, dear," she would say with a laugh. "I'm doing fine, just sewing and keeping busy." She didn't want him to know the truth. She didn't want him to be burdened with the idea that his mother had become financially independent. She didn't want him to become complacent, thinking that wealth could be easily inherited. But Clara also couldn't help but feel a secret pride as she looked around the house, one of the few places she allowed herself to indulge. The furniture was modest, but each piece had a story. The antique chairs in the dining room had been carefully selected, the rugs handwoven by a local artisan. Everything in the house was a reflection of the life she had built, brick by brick, thread by thread. Her financial empire continued to grow, quietly but steadily. She invested in more properties, more commercial spaces. She had an accountant, Mr. Harris, who reviewed her portfolio and advised her on the best ways to diversify her holdings. She had saved, invested, and worked hard for every dollar, but she had never let anyone know the true scale of her success. Sophia had come into Clara's life when she was already in her 60s, just when Clara had begun to feel that maybe, just maybe, she could finally rest. But Sophia was a storm, a whirlwind of ambition and self-assurance that Clara couldn't ignore. She was everything Clara had feared would come between her and Ethan. Where Clara had been quiet and humble, Sophia was loud and assertive. Where Clara had built her empire piece by piece, silently and with great care, Sophia seemed to think it was all part of the plan she had already laid out for the family. And so, Clara had continued to hide the full extent of her success. For Ethan, she was still just the seamstress, the woman who sewed dresses and helped people with their lives. But in reality, Clara was a businesswoman, a quiet giant who had built an empire in the shadows. And as the years went by, she wondered how long she could keep it all hidden. She had worked too hard to let everything slip away. Sophia's arrival was the first crack in the facade. Clara had learned long ago how to fight with quiet strength, but now, the real battle was just beginning. Ethan Montgomery had always been a simple man at heart. Raised by his mother, Clara, with humility and dedication, he grew up with the quiet values of hard work, honesty, and the unspoken understanding that family was everything. He had always seen his mother as his rock, steady, unwavering, and strong. But when he met Sophia, everything began to change. It wasn't immediate, but it was inevitable. Sophia entered Ethan's life like a breath of fresh air, the kind of air that promised something new, something better. At first, Ethan was enchanted by her beauty and confidence. She was everything he wasn't, bold, vivacious, and full of energy. She carried herself with the kind of effortless grace that turned heads in any room. Her laughter was intoxicating, her smile radiant, and she had this way of making him feel like the most important person in the world. To Ethan, it felt like a dream come true. Sophia was the woman he had always imagined being with, someone who knew what she wanted and went after it with a fierce determination. At first, their relationship was exciting. Every date, every phone call, every smile from Sophia made Ethan's heart race with anticipation. But beneath the surface, there was something else, something that Ethan couldn't quite place, something that bothered him in ways he wasn't ready to admit. Sophia, it seemed, was never content with what she had. She always wanted more, and it was clear she wasn't willing to settle for anything less than perfection. As their relationship deepened, Sophia began to subtly shift the balance in Ethan's life. It was small at first, almost imperceptible, like a quiet ripple across the surface of a calm lake. She encouraged him to dress differently, to upgrade his wardrobe to match the lifestyle she was used to. "You need to dress for success, Ethan," she'd say with that familiar, practiced smile. "The world only takes you seriously when you look the part." Ethan, eager to impress and please, went along with it. He started buying more expensive clothes, a shiny new watch that he couldn't quite afford, and even a brand new car. He told himself it was all worth it, that Sophia would be proud. But with each purchase, the distance between him and his mother grew just a little more. Sophia was always so polished, so perfectly put together. She exuded confidence and sophistication in a way that made Ethan feel like he was finally part of a world that seemed just out of his reach. She spoke with authority, and Ethan, without realizing it, started to look to her for answers to questions he would have previously asked Clara. When he needed advice on a work problem, it was Sophia's opinion that mattered most. When decisions had to be made, Sophia's voice became the loudest in his head, drowning out all others, especially his mother. The first time Clara noticed the change was subtle, almost imperceptible. Ethan had always been close to her, their Sunday visits a sacred tradition, a time when they could catch up, share a meal, and talk about their week. But over time, Sophia's presence started to overshadow those visits. Ethan would show up late, or worse, not at all, because Sophia had plans. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he'd say, his voice tinged with an unfamiliar strain. "Sophia and I have a dinner with friends tonight. Can we catch up next week?" Clara, always understanding, made excuses for him. He was busy, after all. But in her heart, she felt something stirring, a sense of unease. The boy she had raised with such care, the one who would tell her everything, seemed to be slipping away, bit by bit, into a life that felt distant from hers. As the months went on, the changes in Ethan grew more pronounced. Sophia began to make subtle, yet increasingly pointed, comments about Clara's lifestyle. "Do you really think your mom needs to be managing everything herself at her age?" she asked, her voice dripping with feigned concern. "She should let you take care of her, Ethan. You've worked so hard. She's your responsibility now." Ethan, not fully aware of the manipulation, would nod, agreeing with her. "I know, I just want to make sure she's okay, but you know how she is. Stubborn, always wants to do everything herself." Sophia would smile, her eyes narrowing just slightly, a glimmer of satisfaction behind her perfectly made-up eyes. "I understand, but it's hard, isn't it? You can't be everything to everyone. You deserve more, Ethan. You deserve a life with someone who will help you build it." And there it was, the subtle planting of seeds. Each time Sophia made a comment like that, Ethan felt a twinge of doubt about his mother. He began to question her ways, her strength. Was she really as independent as she seemed, or was she just stubborn? Each passing day, he grew more reliant on Sophia's opinions, on her assurances that they were doing the right thing. Clara, for all her quiet wisdom, could see it happening. She could see the influence Sophia was having on Ethan, the way he was slowly being pulled away from her. The shift was slow, imperceptible at first, but it was there. She began to lose the son she had raised with such love, the boy who had once told her everything, to a woman who used her charm to subtly control him. It wasn't that Ethan didn't love his mother anymore. He did. But the lines were becoming blurred. He had always sought his mother's approval, but now Sophia had woven herself so tightly into the fabric of his life that Clara began to feel like an outsider in her own son's world. The more Sophia gained influence, the more Ethan began to change. His confidence grew, yes, but it wasn't his own. It was Sophia's confidence, her vision of what his life should look like, shaping him in her image. And slowly, Clara began to understand that it wasn't just about the money, the clothes, or the lifestyle. It was about control. Sophia wanted Ethan, and by extension his family, under her thumb, and she was succeeding. As Ethan's transformation continued, Clara's heart grew heavy. She was losing him in small, quiet ways. The phone calls became less frequent, the visits rarer. His actions spoke louder than his words ever could, and every time he chose Sophia over her, a little piece of Clara's heart broke. But Clara was no fool. She had spent years building her empire, learning how to spot manipulation and control. Sophia may have had Ethan wrapped around her finger, but Clara wasn't going to let her son slip away without a fight. She had fought for every inch of her success, and she wasn't about to lose the most important thing in her life without a fight. And so, Clara silently began to plan, her resolve strengthening with each passing day. Sophia had no idea what she was up against. Clara sat in the quiet of her home, a faint hum from the refrigerator breaking the stillness as she ran her fingers over the edge of her knitting needle. She had been knitting for years, a calming ritual that soothed her mind and kept her hands busy. But tonight, her thoughts were anything but peaceful. Her mind kept drifting back to Ethan's last visit, the way he seemed to avoid her gaze, the hesitation in his voice when they spoke. Something had changed in him, and it was all tied to Sophia. She had suspected it for some time now. The little comments, the sudden changes in Ethan's behavior, the way he was starting to pull away from her. But today, as he sat across from her at the kitchen table, there was a heaviness in the air that Clara couldn't ignore. Ethan had been coming by less often lately, his visits shorter, filled with more silence and less laughter. And whenever he did come, Sophia was never far from his thoughts. "Mom," Ethan began, his voice tinged with uncertainty as he picked at his food. "I've been thinking a lot lately, about everything." Clara set down her knitting, her heart tightening in her chest. This wasn't just a casual conversation. She could sense it. There was something serious, something important coming. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" Clara asked, her tone gentle, yet laced with concern. She didn't want to pry too much, but the knot in her stomach tightened as she watched him. She could tell he was struggling. "It's just, I've been trying to balance everything lately, you know," Ethan continued, avoiding her gaze as he fiddled with his glass. "Work, Sophia, everything. I've been thinking that maybe I need to be more in control, like she says." Clara's pulse quickened, but she didn't show it. She simply nodded, careful to keep her expression neutral. "More in control of what, darling?" Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck, a gesture Clara had come to recognize as one of his telltale signs of anxiety. "Sophia's been talking about how I need to manage everything, my finances, my time, all of it. She says I need to focus on the future to really start planning. And well, I guess I agree with her." Clara fought the urge to swallow the bitterness that rose in her throat. "What exactly does she mean by managing everything, Ethan?" Her voice was calm, but beneath the surface, the question weighed heavily on her. She had been keeping quiet for so long, hoping that this moment would never come. But now it was here. She had to tread carefully. "She says I need to be smarter with my finances," Ethan answered, his words coming faster now, as if he needed to justify himself. "And honestly, I think she's right. You know, I've always struggled with keeping track of everything. She's better at it, more organized. She wants us to invest more to take risks. I don't know, Mom, maybe it's time I listen to her." Clara's mind raced. She had always managed the family finances with precision, never needing anyone's help. She had worked so hard to maintain the appearance of a struggling seamstress, all while building something far greater than Ethan could imagine. And now, here was her son, questioning her ability, not because he had any doubts about her methods, but because Sophia had planted seeds of doubt in his mind. She took a deep breath, her voice steady as she replied, "Ethan, I've always been careful with our money. I've made sure we live within our means, that we save for the future. I know I'm not perfect, but I've done the best I can for you, and I'm proud of that." Ethan's gaze flickered, but he quickly looked away, a faint unease flashing in his eyes. "I know, Mom, I know, but Sophia, she's had more experience with this kind of thing. She's helped me see things differently, and I think we could do better. I want to make sure I'm doing right by her, by us." Clara felt a pang in her chest, but she held her ground. She knew what was happening now. Sophia was slowly weaving her web around Ethan, and he was falling for it. He couldn't see the manipulation because it was wrapped in the guise of concern, of helping him make better decisions. But Clara knew the truth. "She's got you believing that you can't handle things on your own, doesn't she?" Clara's voice was soft, but the words were sharp, and Ethan flinched slightly. "Ethan, you're more than capable of managing your finances, of making your own choices. You've always been responsible." "I know, Mom," Ethan said, his voice a little softer now, but his eyes avoided hers. "But Sophia says you're too old-fashioned. She says you're stuck in your ways." Clara's heart sank. Too old-fashioned. She had heard the whispers, but hearing them from her own son stung more than she cared to admit. She had spent her entire life fighting, building, sacrificing, and now she was being dismissed as out of touch. All because Sophia had found a way to manipulate him into believing that her way was the only way. "I've been doing this for years, Ethan," Clara said, her voice gaining strength, though she kept it measured. "I've worked my whole life to make sure you had a future. Don't let her make you think you don't have it in you to stand on your own." Ethan looked at her, his expression conflicted. I'm not saying that, Mom. I want to make things easier for both of us, you know. Clara nodded slowly, her fingers curling into the fabric of her sleeve. I understand that, darling, but don't let someone else make you doubt what you've already built. You've got everything you need inside you. The conversation seemed to fizzle after that, and Ethan soon excused himself, his thoughts clouded, his mind torn between the woman he had married and the mother who had always been there for him. Clara watched him leave, her heart heavy with the weight of what was happening. The seeds of doubt had already been planted, and now they were growing, choking the trust that had once been so strong. As she sat alone in the silence of her home, Clara felt a growing unease. The more she observed Sophia's influence, the more she realized how deeply embedded it had become in Ethan's life. She was losing him slowly, one subtle shift at a time. And though she couldn't explain it to him, Clara knew she had to act. The time for silence was over. Sophia had been playing a long game, and now Clara had no choice but to prepare for the fight of her life. It was a battle of wills, a battle for her son, and a battle for her family's future. And Clara was ready. The soft hum of wedding music filled the air as Clara Montgomery sat in the back row of the elegant venue, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The day she had both dreaded and anticipated had arrived. Her son, Ethan, was marrying Sophia, the woman who had waltzed into their lives like a whirlwind, leaving behind a trail of confusion and uncertainty. Today, Clara was here to watch her son take a step into a new chapter of his life. And yet, as she sat there, a sense of unease settled deep within her. It wasn't just the grandiosity of the event, the gleaming chandeliers, the exquisite flowers, the meticulously planned speeches that spoke of a fairy-tale love. No, it was something deeper. As she watched Ethan, dressed in his tuxedo, standing proudly at the altar, his face glowing with a kind of happiness she hadn't seen in years, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There was pride in her heart, of course, pride in seeing her son so grown, so confident, so ready to build a life of his own. But there was also a tightening in her chest, a growing sense of dread. Sophia stood beside Ethan, radiant in her white gown. Her smile was flawless, her posture poised, but Clara saw beyond the surface. Sophia's presence was almost too perfect, too calculated. Her every move screamed control, and Clara could feel it in the way her daughter-in-law interacted with the world, effortlessly commanding attention, her voice always a little louder, her eyes always scanning the room as if she was assessing everything around her. It was as if she knew she belonged here, as if the world had already accepted her as the rightful ruler of Ethan's life. As the ceremony continued, Clara tried to focus on the vows, on the love she hoped they would build, but her mind kept drifting back to the subtle signs she'd picked up over the last few months. Sophia had a way of speaking that made everything sound so logical, so reasonable, but Clara had learned to read between the lines. Every conversation with Sophia had become a game of subtle manipulation, where her words never quite matched the emotions behind them. Today, it was no different. During the reception, as Clara moved to the buffet table to fetch a drink, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. Sophia was standing with a few guests, her hand resting lightly on Ethan's arm, smiling as if she were the queen of the evening. "Oh, it's so nice to see everyone here," Sophia was saying, her voice smooth like silk. "Ethan and I have big plans for the future. We're going to make sure everything is handled with the utmost care, especially when it comes to our finances. Ethan's been a little, well, lost on that front, but don't worry, I'm here to take charge of things." The words stung. Clara could hear the subtext. Ethan needs me to take care of him. She could hear the subtle dismissal of her own role in his life. She was no longer the one who had raised him, who had built everything with her own two hands. To Sophia, she was just an outdated relic of the past, someone who didn't know how to manage the modern world. Clara took a slow breath, trying to maintain her composure. She turned her head just slightly, her eyes locking with Sophia. There was a flicker of something in Sophia's gaze, something almost triumphant. It was as if she had already won, as if the game was over and the prize was hers. Later, as the night wore on and the guests danced and laughed, Clara found herself standing by the windows, gazing out at the night sky. She hadn't danced. She hadn't felt like it. Instead, she watched her son and his new wife glide across the dance floor, their movements synchronized, perfect. Ethan's smile was genuine, but Clara could see it now. The way he leaned into Sophia's touch, the way he looked at her as if she were the center of his world. And in that moment, Clara realized something that made her stomach drop. This wasn't just about love. This wasn't just about building a life together. Sophia's plans went far beyond marriage. She was already positioning herself to control everything: Ethan's career, his future, and most dangerously, his financial empire. She had already started making decisions for him, calling the shots behind closed doors, planting ideas in his head that only served to alienate him further from the woman who had given him everything. Clara clenched her hands tighter. She had worked so hard to build a life for herself and Ethan, to give him a future that he could be proud of. And now, in front of her eyes, Sophia was taking all of that away. Clara had been quiet for too long, but she knew now that her silence had allowed this to happen. She had let it go on, hoping that Sophia would eventually show her true colors. But now it was clear. Sophia had no intentions of being just a wife. She wanted to be the one in control. Clara's heart ached as she watched Ethan twirl his bride across the dance floor. Why couldn't he see it? She thought. Why couldn't he see that Sophia was only using him to get what she wanted? A wave of uncertainty washed over Clara. She was at a crossroads. Part of her wanted to confront Sophia, to expose the manipulation, but the other part of her, the part that had spent years keeping her son grounded, was terrified of what might happen if she did. Would it push Ethan further away? Would he see her as the villain in his story? And yet, Clara knew deep down that if she didn't do something now, it might be too late. She couldn't let this woman, this stranger, control everything she had fought for. But as the evening wore on, Clara made a decision. She wouldn't stay silent anymore, not when her son's future was at stake. The wedding had been a turning point, and now Clara knew that she had to fight, not just for herself, but for Ethan too. Tomorrow, she would begin. As Clara stood at the window, watching the last of the wedding guests leave, her thoughts turned inward. The evening had been a blur, a carefully orchestrated performance where Sophia had played her part to perfection. She was the dazzling bride, the flawless woman who had somehow captivated everyone around her, including her own son, Ethan. But Clara knew better. Beneath that polished exterior, Sophia was nothing more than a woman clinging to a facade, one that had taken years to construct, and, even more desperately, years to maintain. Clara's mind wandered back, slowly unraveling the threads of Sophia's carefully woven story. She had met Sophia when she first entered Ethan's life, soft-spoken, confident, a woman with sharp style and polished charm. She'd instantly caught Ethan's attention, drawing him in with the perfect mix of vulnerability and ambition. But Clara had always trusted her instincts, and from the moment Sophia had crossed her threshold, something felt off. It wasn't just the way she dressed, or the way she talked with such conviction about her accomplishments. It was something deeper. Sophia had told Ethan that she had grown up in a well-off family. Her father had been a successful businessman, she said, a man of dignity who had raised her with the finest things in life. She spoke of vacations in tropical destinations, luxurious cars, and lavish family gatherings. To Ethan, these stories seemed to fit the woman standing before him. But to Clara, they reeked of a kind of glossed-over perfection, a perfection that didn't quite make sense. Clara's mind flickered back to the night she had decided to find out more about Sophia, her curiosity growing, her sense of protection for Ethan pushing her into action. She had been wary, watching Sophia's behavior over the course of their meetings, and it wasn't until she saw how little she truly knew about Sophia's background that Clara had taken matters into her own hands. She had reached out to an old contact, a private investigator, to learn more about the woman who had infiltrated their family with such ease. What came back was a revelation. Sophia's life had not been the picture of wealth and privilege she had painted. In fact, it had been the opposite. Her family's once thriving business had collapsed when she was just 18, the result of disastrous investments and fraudulent partners who had brought them to their knees. Sophia's father, once a proud and successful businessman, fell into a deep depression after the loss, and her mother, now a shadow of her former self, was forced to sell costume jewelry at flea markets just to make ends meet. Far from the glamorous life she claimed, Sophia had grown up in a rundown neighborhood, her family grappling with poverty. Clara had read through the report from the investigator, each line more damning than the last. Sophia's family had lost everything: their home, their cars, and their status in society. Sophia had been forced to take odd jobs, and at one point had even sold low-end merchandise at a local store just to help her mother make rent. But in the years that followed, Sophia's ambition burned brighter than her circumstances. She wasn't content with the life she had been handed. Clara felt a pang of sympathy for the girl Sophia had once been, someone trapped in a cycle of poverty, unsure of her place in the world. But that sympathy faded quickly, replaced by a deeper, more unsettling understanding of what Sophia had become. In a world that had told her she wasn't enough, Sophia had made the decision to become someone, to create a new identity that was far removed from the girl who had grown up in a cramped apartment with broken dreams. She had studied business at a community college, where she had fabricated an impressive resume, adding false credentials to make herself appear more qualified than she truly was. She spoke in a neutral accent, carefully perfecting her speech so she could blend in with people from wealthier circles. And her social media accounts were full of carefully curated images of her life: vacations in luxurious locations, expensive meals, designer clothes, each post meticulously crafted to project the image of success. But behind the veneer of sophistication, Clara had learned that Sophia was drowning in debt. Credit card bills stacked up, unpaid loans buried her further, and yet she continued to live a life of excess, one that only existed in her mind. A woman who couldn't even afford the luxury she pretended to own, and yet convinced everyone around her that she was the epitome of success. The more Clara read, the more her anger grew, but it was tempered by a strange sense of understanding. She had once been there herself, struggling, hiding her hardships, making do with whatever scraps life had given her. But Clara had built herself up with honesty, with hard work, and with patience. Sophia had chosen a different route, one built on deception and manipulation, using her beauty and her calculated charm to entice men like Ethan, men who were too trusting, too eager to believe in the illusion she created. As the truth sank in, Clara couldn't help but feel a twinge of regret. Had she been too slow in seeing the signs, too hesitant in speaking up? She could have warned Ethan earlier, could have exposed Sophia's lies before they had gone so far. But in a strange way, she also understood why Ethan had fallen for her. He hadn't known. He had no idea about the debts, the lies, the falsehoods. To him, she was just the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman who had swept him off his feet, who promised him a future of security and success. Sophia had been smart, too smart in her pursuit of Ethan. She knew how to appeal to his emotions, how to make him feel like the hero in her story. And through it all, Clara had remained silent, until now, until that moment when the truth had to come out. But there was something that still gnawed at Clara's conscience. Sophia had already manipulated Ethan so completely that even Clara's efforts to expose her now would seem like an attack on the woman he loved. He was so far gone, so convinced of Sophia's sincerity, that even the evidence Clara held in her hands might not be enough to change his mind. She had to act carefully, thoughtfully. If she was to have any hope of saving her son from a life of manipulation, she had to tread lightly. She couldn't make Ethan feel cornered or betrayed. She had to make him see the truth, slowly, gently, with care. Clara's resolve hardened. The truth would come out, but it had to be done on her terms. For Ethan's sake, for her sake. Sophia's reign of manipulation would not go unchallenged. Clara Montgomery had fought too hard to be silenced now. The battle was just beginning. Sophia had always been careful, a strategist in the game of manipulation, playing her cards in the most subtle of ways. At first, Ethan didn't notice. But as weeks turned into months, the little shifts in their relationship, the whispers in his ear, the offhand comments Sophia made, began to weave a quiet but insidious narrative. She had him wrapped around her finger, and he didn't even realize it. It started with little jabs, seemingly harmless, offhand remarks about Clara's age, her lifestyle, and her habits. They seemed innocent enough at first, disguised as concern. But Sophia's words had a weight to them that Ethan couldn't always identify. "Mom doesn't really understand, does she?" Sophia would say when Ethan expressed an opinion that differed from hers. She's from a different generation, honey. She's stuck in her ways. You know, she still uses cash for things. It's 2025, Ethan. Credit cards, digital payments, those are the tools of success in today's world. The tone was always gentle, like she was trying to protect him from the burden of his mother's outdated thinking. But it worked. Every time, that little seed of doubt grew in Ethan's mind. Was Clara outdated? Was she clinging to a past that no longer mattered? Then there were the comments about Clara's financial decisions. Sophia was far from a financial expert herself, but she had mastered the art of projecting an air of authority when it came to money. Mom's always been a little tight with money, hasn't she? Sophia would say. I mean, I can't remember the last time we went out for dinner. She never wants to spend. I get that she's trying to save, but babe, it's okay to live a little, you know. Life's too short. Ethan would frown, momentarily uncertain. He knew his mother was frugal, always careful with her money, but had that always been a bad thing? Was his mother's cautious approach to life actually limiting him? The doubts Sophia planted were subtle, but they began to grow like weeds in his mind. Sophia's whispers didn't stop at Clara's spending habits. She would also cast aspersions on her ability to handle things, anything from running her own household to managing her finances. Babe, your mom's getting older, she'd say when Ethan would suggest visiting Clara on a Sunday afternoon. You know, she's really going to need someone to help her with all that stuff around the house. Maybe it's time we start looking into a caretaker for her. She's not as young as she used to be, and it wouldn't hurt for her to have some help. Her words were always coated in a layer of concern, but it was clear that they were designed to make Ethan question Clara's independence. They were planting a subtle notion. His mother was getting older, weaker, less capable. Wasn't it about time he took charge of things? And wasn't it more convenient if that charge was handed over to Sophia? The comments about Clara's age weren't just about her physical state. They extended into her lifestyle, her entire way of being. She's probably not keeping up with the latest trends. I mean, I love her, but have you seen her wardrobe? Sophia once said, laughing lightly as she flipped through a catalog of clothing on her tablet. She still dresses like she's in the 90s, Ethan. It's kind of sweet, but you know, maybe we can help her update things a little. Ethan had never really thought about Clara's clothes, but after that comment, he began to notice. And when he'd see his mother wear the same old cardigan from years ago, or the worn-out shoes she refused to replace, he couldn't help but feel a slight pang of embarrassment. Maybe Sophia was right. Maybe his mother did need to update her appearance, her way of thinking, to fit the world they were now in. Slowly, ever so slowly, the distance between mother and son grew. Clara could feel it, but she remained silent, watching with quiet anguish as Sophia's influence slowly but surely took hold of Ethan. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the subtle erosion of their bond, the small things Sophia said, the offhand comments that chipped away at Ethan's perception of his mother. Sophia's true skill lay in the way she made everything seem like a reasonable suggestion, a harmless concern. When Ethan would bring up his mother, she'd gently remind him how much responsibility he had, how much he had on his plate. You're a grown man now, Ethan. You don't need to be worrying about your mom. Let's focus on us. Let's focus on our future. Ethan, unsure of how to navigate this growing divide, would reluctantly nod. Of course, he wanted what was best for his mother, but what was best? Was it taking care of her forever, holding her hand through every little task? Or was it helping her to adjust, to move on with the times, as Sophia often suggested? The small distance between mother and son stretched further each day. Clara noticed the change in his tone, the slight hesitation in his voice when he would call. The way he seemed to rush off the phone now, always with an excuse to cut the conversation short. And when she would visit him and Sophia, she noticed the unspoken tension between them. The way Sophia would interrupt her, dismiss her ideas, or ignore her altogether. It was never overt, never blatant, but the cracks were there, and Clara could feel them deep in her heart. The campaign of control, while slow, was insidious. Sophia was never confrontational, never demanding outright. Instead, she used Ethan's love for her to gently bend him to her will, until he no longer saw his mother as an equal partner in his life. She had become, in Ethan's eyes, a relic of the past, something to be managed rather than loved, something to be handled with care but from a distance. And so the rift continued to grow, fueled by Sophia's steady, invisible hand. Clara was losing her son, one small manipulation at a time. The Christmas tree in Clara Montgomery's living room was beautiful that year, tall, full of gold and red ornaments, glistening under the soft glow of the fireplace. The house was warm, the scent of cinnamon and pine filling the air, and yet Clara felt cold. Cold in a way that no sweater, no woolen scarf could ever warm. As she watched Ethan and Sophia prepare to leave after the Christmas dinner, her chest tightened with every passing moment. The joy and laughter that filled the house didn't reach her. They didn't belong to her anymore. It was all theirs. Sophia's presence in Ethan's life had become so overpowering that it was as though Clara was fading into the background, her place in her own family slowly being erased. Clara had always been proud of Ethan, the son she had raised alone after her husband's death. She had sacrificed everything for him, worked endless hours, giving him a future she couldn't have imagined for herself. She had been the one who was there when he scraped his knee, the one who tucked him in at night, the one who listened to his dreams. And now she watched him, her boy, her baby, become someone she didn't recognize. Every Sunday, when she had used to be the first call on his phone, the connection was now weak. He was always busy, always too caught up in his life with Sophia to spare time for her. The visits, once a comforting routine, had become infrequent, awkward, rushed. She saw it in his eyes, the guilt that wasn't there before, the distance that wasn't there before. And he didn't even realize it was happening. This Christmas dinner had been the last straw, the moment she couldn't ignore the deep rift between them any longer. Ethan's smile, so bright as he held Sophia's hand, said everything she feared. He was hers now, heart and soul. And Clara, the woman who had given him life, the woman who had loved him with everything she had become a mere figurehead in his life. It wasn't just that they were busy. It wasn't just that they were building a life together. It was how they were building it, without her. Sophia's presence, her words, her influence, had slowly stripped Clara of her place. She could see the subtle manipulations, the way Sophia would dismiss her ideas with a polite smile, or how she would interrupt Clara during a conversation, as if her opinion didn't matter. The sharp edge of Sophia's dismissals cut deeper than Clara could admit to herself. And then the final blow had come, Sophia's announcement at dinner, her declaration of control over everything, even Clara's finances. Her credit card had been canceled. Clara felt the words cut through her as she stood there, frozen. The room had fallen silent, and it wasn't just the clink of her glass or the crackling of the fire that filled the air. It was the cold, unmistakable feeling of betrayal. "At your age, you don't need to worry about expenses," Sophia had said, so casually, as though she had the right. The audacity, the coldness of it, was jarring. As if Clara were no longer capable of managing her own affairs, as if she were a child who needed someone to step in. And Ethan, her son, had stood by, nodding in agreement. He never questioned it, never once asked if she was okay with this, if this was what she wanted. He hadn't seen her pain, hadn't seen the woman who had once been his everything, standing there, humiliated. No, he was busy admiring his wife, as she took control of everything, every part of their life, including Clara's. It was as if the ground had shifted beneath Clara's feet. The reality she had fought so hard to build, her pride, her quiet achievements, were nothing in the eyes of the family now. Clara forced herself to keep her composure, even as her insides twisted with hurt. She was silent as everyone else continued to chatter, celebrating the holiday as though nothing had changed. As though she hadn't just been reduced to nothing in the blink of an eye. The silence in her heart was deafening, louder than the cheerful clinks of glasses or the festive music playing in the background. She'd spent years being the silent protector, the one who had worked to give Ethan everything. Now it was her time to fight back. But even then, the real question was, how? For so long, Clara had swallowed her pride, letting the small slights slide by, hoping things would go back to the way they were. But now she couldn't, not anymore. Her mind raced as the weight of the moment hit her. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it was. And for the first time in a long time, Clara realized she had to make a choice. She could either continue to silently watch her son slip further into Sophia's grasp, or she could reclaim her place, not just as his mother, but as someone who had a right to be heard, to be respected. The woman who had built an empire in secret, the woman who had fought against all odds to create a life for herself and her son, she had a right to stand up. But the silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating, as she sat there watching them leave. As they walked out of her life, their backs turned to her in their haste to continue their life without her. That night, alone in the stillness of her home, Clara closed her eyes, taking a long, steadying breath. The time for silence had passed. She had been quiet for too long, hiding behind the illusion of being the dutiful mother. It was time to show Ethan who she truly was. It was time for her to take back control. The days following that Christmas dinner passed in a blur of forced smiles and polite conversation. Clara Montgomery maintained her usual composure, outwardly calm and steady, but inwardly, she was building something that would shake her family to its core. The silence in her house was no longer oppressive. It was a calm before the storm. She had been planning this for days, gathering the necessary documents, reaching out to trusted allies, and preparing herself for a confrontation that was long overdue. Every night after dinner, Clara would retreat to her study, a small, cozy room at the back of the house, filled with leather-bound books, antique furniture, and a heavy oak desk that had been in her family for generations. The room had always been her sanctuary, the place where she could think, plan, and reflect. It was where her empire had begun, and it would be where she would set the stage for its next chapter. She carefully spread out the papers in front of her, bank statements, property deeds, investment portfolios, and contracts that she had meticulously kept hidden from everyone, including Ethan. Her hands, steady despite the weight of the moment, flipped through the documents as if she were looking for a hidden treasure. But the treasure wasn't hidden. It had always been right in front of her. Clara had always prided herself on her ability to manage the intricacies of her finances, but she had never wanted to flaunt her wealth, especially to Ethan. She had kept her success quiet, thinking it would teach him humility, teach him the value of working for something rather than relying on wealth. But now, that decision seemed foolish. It had allowed Sophia to take advantage, to manipulate Ethan into thinking he could control his mother's life. It had allowed her to slip in under the guise of being the modern woman who could handle everything, while Clara quietly faded into the background. But Clara had played her part. The time for silence was over. She would not let them continue their assumption that she was a helpless, aging woman who needed to be cared for. The truth, the real truth about who she was and what she had built, would finally come to light. Clara's lawyer, Jameson Jamie Cross, had been working with her in the background, providing discreet counsel and helping her prepare for the eventual confrontation. Jamie had been Clara's trusted advisor for years, and he understood the delicate nature of the situation. They had worked together to ensure that everything was in order, that Clara's legal and financial interests were protected, and that she had the ammunition she needed to reclaim her place in her son's life. As she reviewed the documents one last time, Clara's thoughts drifted back to the day she had met Jamie. He had been the one to help her when she first started building her business, teaching her how to protect her assets, how to diversify her investments, and most importantly, how to stay one step ahead of anyone who would try to take advantage of her. He had watched her grow from a widow struggling to make ends meet into the successful, self-made woman she was today. She smiled softly to herself, remembering the early days when she had first come up with the idea to invest in real estate. It had been a gamble, but one she had taken with quiet confidence. Over the years, those small investments had grown, becoming the foundation of the empire she now controlled. She had built her business from the ground up, one brick at a time, and now she was ready to let her son see the truth. Clara picked up her phone and dialed Jamie's number. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Clara," Jamie greeted her in his usual calm, professional tone. "How are you doing?" "I'm ready," Clara replied, her voice steady but firm. "I've gathered everything. The documents are in order, and I'm ready for the showdown at Christmas dinner." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, then Jamie spoke again. "Are you sure about this? You've waited a long time to reveal all of this. It's going to be a big shock for Ethan, for everyone." "I know," Clara replied, her voice unwavering. "But it's time. I've been silent for too long, Jamie. It's time to take back my dignity, time to show them who I really am." "All right," Jamie said, a hint of pride in his voice. "I'll be there at 9 p.m. I'll bring everything you need, trust me, they won't see it coming." "Thank you, Jamie," Clara said softly, her gratitude evident. "I couldn't have done this without you." Clara hung up the phone and sat back in her chair, staring out the window at the snow-covered yard. The world outside was quiet, peaceful, a stark contrast to the storm she was about to unleash. Her heart beat steadily in her chest as she took a deep breath, her resolve growing stronger by the minute. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about reclaiming her place in her son's life. It was about showing him that she wasn't just the mother who had raised him. It was about showing him that she was still a force to be reckoned with. She had built something that no one could take from her, and now it was time to make sure they all understood that. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her thoughts, steadying her nerves. She had always been calm in the face of adversity, always able to keep her composure no matter how hard things got. But now, this was different. This wasn't just another obstacle. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she would take back control of her life and her family. The time had come. The Christmas dinner would be her stage, and she would show them all who she really was. The next few days passed quickly as Clara finalized everything for the dinner. She carefully chose her outfit, a simple yet elegant black dress with a wool shawl she had knitted herself. She wanted to look exactly the way Sophia expected her to, a humble, old woman who had nothing to offer. But the truth was, Clara was far from that. The night before Christmas, Clara sat down at her kitchen table, reviewing her plan once more. She had already contacted Jamie to confirm the timing. Everything was in place. She couldn't help but feel a small flutter of excitement, the anticipation building as she thought about how the night would unfold. As she sipped her tea, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, her son would know the truth. Tomorrow, Clara Montgomery would no longer be invisible. She would be seen, and she would be heard. The evening unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony, a symphony where the final crescendo was yet to come. The house was lit by the soft glow of candles, the table meticulously set with fine china and silver, each dish a masterpiece. The Christmas tree stood proudly in the corner, its lights twinkling in time with the music playing softly in the background. Yet beneath the warmth of the celebration, an undercurrent of tension vibrated through the air, thickening with every passing moment. Clara Montgomery sat at the head of the table, her posture tall and straight, though the weight of the night rested heavily on her shoulders. Her heart was calm, her mind resolute. She had waited for this moment, for the confrontation that would finally reveal the truth. Sophia Montgomery, her daughter-in-law, stood across from her, a glass of champagne in hand. Her smile was wide, but Clara could see the edge of it, the calculation behind her eyes. There was something about Sophia's demeanor tonight that felt more like a queen preparing to make a final declaration than a woman celebrating Christmas with her family. The warmth of the occasion seemed to only highlight the coldness of her words. As the dinner continued, Clara could feel the rising tension with every passing second. The family laughed and chatted, but Clara remained still, the weight of what she was about to do settling heavily in her chest. She had always been the quiet observer, the one who had silently sacrificed for her son, for her family. But tonight would be different. Tonight, Clara would show them who she truly was. The moment came when Sophia stood up, her voice ringing out over the dinner table, cutting through the quiet murmur of conversation. The clink of her glass silenced the room, drawing everyone's attention to her. "Family," Sophia began, her voice smooth and confident, "I want to make a toast to new beginnings, to growth, to family, and to the future. This Christmas, we celebrate not only our love and unity, but a new chapter for this family. As you know, Michael and I have made some important decisions, and I want to share them with all of you." Clara watched, her eyes narrowing slightly as Sophia's smile grew even more insufferable. Michael, sitting beside her, looked on with adoration, completely oblivious to the manipulation that had been building beneath the surface. Clara could see the pride in his eyes, the way he looked at Sophia like she was the solution to all his problems. "I've decided," Sophia continued, her eyes flicking to Clara, "that from now on I will manage all of the family's finances. It's time for someone with a modern vision, someone with experience to take control." Clara's heart sank. This was it, the moment where Sophia would claim her victory, would finally tighten the noose around her son's neck. But Clara was ready. The room was dead silent, the air thick with expectation. Sophia smiled, the smile of someone who believed they had already won. The others at the table exchanged knowing glances, some nodding in agreement, while others remained still, unsure of how to react. Clara's eyes never left Sophia's. "And as part of this new management," Sophia continued, her gaze locking with Clara, "I've already made a few changes, starting with Clara's credit card, which was canceled this morning. I spoke to Michael about it. At her age, she doesn't need to worry about finances. We'll take care of everything for her from now on. It's better this way." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. It wasn't the cancellation of her card. It was the tone, the calculated cruelty, the way Sophia had framed her as an old woman incapable of handling her own life. She could feel the shock ripple through the room, but it wasn't from the family's concern for Clara. No, it was the quiet approval, the silent agreement among them that Sophia had made the right choice. Her son, Michael, sat there, his mouth agape for a moment before he spoke. "Mom, it's for the best," he said, his voice strained with a mix of defensiveness and guilt. "You don't need to worry about these things anymore. We'll take care of it all." Clara took a deep breath, holding her composure as best she could. But inside, something had snapped. This wasn't just about money, it was about control, about the way her son had been slowly taken from her. The weight of it all hit her, but she didn't show it. She simply watched him, watched the man he had become, and felt the distance between them widen with every word he spoke. For a moment, everything felt distant, like she was trapped in a dream, watching her life from the outside. Her mind flashed to the years she had spent raising Ethan alone, building a life from the ashes of widowhood. And now, here he was, siding with a woman who had no understanding of the sacrifices she had made. It hurt, but Clara knew she couldn't let it break her. She had to do something. She had to reclaim her place, her dignity. Clara stood slowly, the room falling silent as she did. She felt every inch of her 68 years, the weight of the decades bearing down on her, but she stood tall. Her gaze never wavered from her son. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft but firm, "you really don't know, do you?" The words hit him like a slap. Michael froze, his smile faltering as confusion spread across his face. "What do you mean, Mom?" he asked, his voice shaky, as if he didn't want to understand what was happening. Sophia's expression faltered for just a second, but it was enough. Clara could see the panic behind the calm exterior. She had expected her words to land with more force, to shatter Clara into submission. But Clara stood there, unbroken. "Know what, Clara?" Sophia sneered, stepping forward, her confidence wavering for the first time. "What could you possibly know that I do?" Clara let the silence hang in the air for a moment longer, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. Then she smiled, calm, serene, and knowing. "I know everything," she said softly, her voice carrying with it the weight of years of struggle, sacrifice, and quiet strength. "I know who I am, and I know who you are." The room was deathly silent. No one moved. Clara could see the shock in their eyes, the disbelief. Michael looked from Clara to Sophia, his face pale, his lips parted in confusion. Clara took a deep breath, the calmness of her voice belying the storm raging inside her. "Sophia, you've been playing a game for far too long, and tonight the game ends." At that moment, the doorbell rang. Clara didn't turn around, but she could feel the presence of the person who had come to back her up. Mr. Thompson, her lawyer, had arrived. The time had come. "I think it's time you all learned the truth," Clara said, her voice steady, no longer the voice of the downtrodden woman they had all assumed she was. "Tonight, you will understand exactly who you've been dealing with." The family looked on, stunned, as Clara revealed the empire she had quietly built over the years. The papers on the table, bank statements, deeds, and contracts, told the story that no one had expected. The disbelief on their faces was palpable as the truth, like a floodgate, opened wide. Ethan looked at the documents, his hands shaking as he read them. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. His mother, the woman he had thought was struggling, was worth millions. The small home he had seen her live in was a facade, and Sophia, the woman he had chosen over his own mother, had been playing him all along. Clara stood there, her heart heavy with the weight of years of silence. But now, as she watched her family's world crumble, she felt a quiet sense of relief. The truth was out, and everything was about to change. The silence that followed was deafening. Only the rustle of papers, the heavy breathing of family members, and the crackling of the fireplace filled the room. And in that silence, Clara Montgomery knew that she had taken back the control she had lost. Tonight, she had shown them who she really was. The house was silent, the kind of heavy silence that blankets everything after a storm. It was the kind of silence that speaks louder than any words ever could. The room still carried the warmth of the Christmas lights, the remnants of laughter, and the clinking of glasses. But now, all of that was overshadowed by the weight of the truth that had just been exposed. Ethan sat at the table, his hands trembling as they hovered over the papers Clara had laid out before him. His eyes darted over the documents again, trying to make sense of the numbers, the assets, the hidden empire his mother had built in the shadows of her humble facade. He blinked, as if to clear the fog in his mind, but it didn't help. The reality of what Clara had revealed was too much for him to process all at once. Sophia, standing beside him, was a picture of disbelief, her face pale, her lips trembling with anger and frustration. Her usual calm, controlled demeanor was cracking, revealing the true depth of her manipulation. She hadn't expected this. She had expected Clara to crumble under the weight of her own humiliation. But instead, Clara had stood tall, revealing everything she had kept hidden for so long. Ethan looked at Clara, his mother, the woman who had always been the center of his life, and yet, in this moment, he felt like he didn't know her at all. The woman he had grown up with, the one who had worked tirelessly, sacrificed everything for him, was not the struggling seamstress he had believed her to be. She was something else, something far more powerful than he had ever realized. His mind raced as he tried to reconcile the mother he knew with the woman who had just unveiled her true identity. Was everything a lie? Had she really been hiding this from him all these years? How could she have kept this secret? And why? His heart ached with guilt, a deep, gnawing feeling in his chest. Had he betrayed her all these years, believing that she was just like everyone else, just another woman struggling to get by? How many times had he turned to her for help, assuming she was just as vulnerable, just as dependent on him, when in reality she had been standing on her own all along? And yet, he had chosen to ignore it, to stay blind to the truth, because it had been easier that way. His confusion grew as he thought about Sophia, the woman he had trusted, the one he had believed in, the one who had promised him a future, a new beginning. How had she deceived him so thoroughly? And why had he let her? She had made him question his own mother, made him believe that Clara was the problem, that her life, her finances, and her choices were somehow beneath him, beneath them. But now, the truth was undeniable. Sophia's lies were unraveling right before his eyes. He turned to Sophia, his voice shaky. "How could you?" he whispered, his tone filled with hurt and betrayal. "How could you do this? All this time you've been lying to me, to us. I can't believe it." Sophia looked at him, her face a mixture of rage and fear. "I didn't lie," she snapped, her voice rising. "I did what was necessary. You think your mother is some innocent, struggling woman. She's been playing this game for years, manipulating you, keeping you under her thumb. She's been hiding her wealth from you all along." Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're the one who's been manipulating me, Sophia. All this time you've been playing me, twisting everything I believed. You made me think my mother was the problem. But the truth is, it's you. You've been hiding things from me. You've been hiding your debts, your past, everything." Sophia recoiled as if he had slapped her. "I only did it for us, Michael, for our future. Don't you see? I love you. I wanted us to be something more than just this. I wanted to build a life with you, and you've let your mother stand in the way of that." Ethan's heart raced as he tried to process everything. Was she right? Had he let his mother control his life? Had he allowed his love for her to blind him to the woman he was supposed to build a life with? The guilt weighed heavily on him, but there was something deeper, something colder, growing inside of him. His gaze shifted back to Clara, who sat calmly across the room, her posture straight, her expression serene. She wasn't reacting the way he thought she would. She wasn't angry or upset. She had stood tall in the face of everything, never once wavering. And in that moment, he saw her for who she truly was, the woman who had sacrificed everything to give him a better life. The woman who had fought to protect him, even when he hadn't realized he needed protecting. Clara's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Ethan, I'm not angry with you. I never was. I was just waiting for you to see the truth. The truth is, I've always wanted what's best for you. But you need to understand that your choices, the ones you've made, these decisions you're letting Sophia manipulate you into, will have consequences. And you need to face them, no matter how painful." Ethan's heart broke at her words. How had he allowed it to go this far? How had he let Sophia turn him against his own mother, the woman who had always been there for him? He felt a deep, hollow ache inside, a realization that no amount of apologies could ever undo the damage that had been done. But Clara wasn't finished. "You see, Ethan," she continued, her voice steady, "I didn't keep all of this from you to hurt you. I did it because I wanted you to grow, to stand on your own 2 feet. I wanted you to have the strength to face the world and not rely on anyone, especially me. You've had to struggle, and I've watched you grow stronger because of it. But you've also been naive. You've let someone else's lies shape your decisions, and now you must live with the consequences of those choices." Sophia's face twisted in fury, but she remained silent. Ethan didn't look at her. He couldn't. His heart was focused on one thing, his mother. The truth had come out, and now he had to face it. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, his voice broken. "I didn't know, I couldn't see it, I was blind. I don't know how to fix it." Clara's gaze softened for just a moment. "The first step is understanding, Ethan. The second step is taking responsibility. The third and most important step is forgiveness." Tears welled in Ethan's eyes. He had never felt so small, so utterly lost. He had been caught in a web of lies, and now he was left to pick up the pieces. Sophia, still standing, glanced from Ethan to Clara, her mouth open in disbelief. "You can't be serious, Michael. You're not going to let her win, are you?" But Ethan didn't respond. His focus was solely on Clara, his mother, the woman who had always been the true heart of his life. And in that moment, he understood. The room fell into a deep, suffocating silence, as the shock of the truth settled over everyone like a thick fog. It wasn't just the lies that had hurt him. It was the fact that he had allowed them to define his life for so long. He could feel the weight of that realization crushing him. But Clara, ever the strong one, stood up slowly, her gaze meeting his with the quiet strength that had gotten her through the hardest times. "Ethan," she said softly, "you'll rebuild, but you need to do it with honesty, with truth, and with dignity." And in that moment, Ethan knew that no matter how long it took, he would rebuild, not just with Clara, but for her. For the woman who had spent her entire life building an empire, quietly, lovingly, and fiercely. For the woman who had shown him the true meaning of strength. The Christmas dinner was over, and the real journey had just begun. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, as the weight of everything he had learned settled heavily on his shoulders. His eyes stared at the floor, unable to meet Clara's gaze. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that only comes after a storm. When all the noise has faded, leaving only the echoes of what was left behind. The truth about Sophia, about the manipulation, about the lies, had shattered Ethan's world. For years, he had been blind to the person he had married, too blinded by love, by desire for approval, to see the reality of what was happening around him. He had always thought that he was protecting his mother by letting Sophia take charge, but in doing so, he had lost sight of the very thing he had always cherished: the truth. Ethan had spent the last few days in a fog, wrestling with his emotions, trying to process everything that had unfolded during that chaotic Christmas dinner. He had lost his wife, yes, but more devastatingly, he had lost the trust of the one person who had always been there for him, Clara. Clara's soft footsteps echoed down the hallway, the sound of them growing closer until she appeared in the doorway of his bedroom. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes calm yet heavy with the knowledge of everything that had transpired. Ethan knew she had every right to be angry, to be disappointed, but she had remained the steady anchor she had always been. "Mom," he finally whispered, his voice cracking. "I don't even know where to begin." Clara stepped into the room, sitting beside him on the bed, her presence warm but firm. She didn't say anything at first. Instead, she placed a gentle hand on his, her fingers warm and reassuring. "Look at me, Ethan," she said quietly. He slowly raised his eyes to meet hers. The tears in his eyes shimmered, and the guilt that had been gnawing at him for days now felt like a physical weight pressing against his chest. "I was so blind," he murmured, his voice low with shame. "I thought I was doing the right thing by trusting her, by believing in her, but I couldn't see it. I couldn't see what she was doing to you, to me." Clara nodded, her gaze soft but intense. "Ethan, I know how much you wanted to build a life with her. You wanted her to be the woman who was everything you dreamed of. But sometimes we're so desperate for something we think will make us happy that we ignore the things that truly matter." Ethan swallowed hard, fighting back the rising tide of emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "I let her take everything away from me, from us," he said, his voice shaking. "I let her turn me against you, against the person who's been by my side through everything, the person who raised me when I had no one else. I was so stupid." Clara squeezed his hand, her touch firm and grounding. "You weren't stupid, Ethan. You were doing what you thought was right. But the hardest lesson in life is understanding when we're being manipulated, when we're allowing someone else's control to override our own judgment. And that takes time." A long silence passed between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with understanding, with the quiet acknowledgement that things would never be the same, but they could still be mended. Clara had always been the one to hold everything together, and now it was Ethan's turn to make the effort, to prove that he could be the son she had always hoped for. "I know I've hurt you, Mom," Ethan continued, his voice full of regret. "I should have seen it sooner. I should have protected you from her. I should have stood up for you when it mattered. But instead, I let her tear us apart, and I was too selfish to even realize it." Clara leaned forward slightly, her eyes steady on his face. "Ethan, I never needed you to protect me. I needed you to see the truth. I needed you to trust in me, in what we've built together. I know you love her, and I know it's hard, but what you're feeling now, this guilt, this regret, it's a part of growing up. It's a part of becoming the man I always knew you could be." Ethan let out a long breath, the weight of the past few days pressing on him like an unrelenting force. "But how do I make this right? How do I fix everything I've done? I hurt you, Mom. I hurt you so much." Clara gave him a small, almost sad smile. "The first step, Ethan, is owning your mistakes. You've done that. You've admitted it, and that's important. The next step is learning from them. You have to decide what kind of man you want to be from now on. Do you want to be the man who lets lies control his life? Or do you want to be the man who stands up for truth and for the people he loves?" Ethan wiped his eyes, the tears now a mix of sorrow and determination. "I want to be the man who makes it right. I want to be the man who earns your trust back, who rebuilds what we had." Clara nodded, her heart swelling with pride for the son she had raised. "And you will, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time, and it's going to take effort. But I believe in you, Ethan. I've always believed in you." The room was silent again, but this time it wasn't because of the weight of the past. It was because, for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like he could breathe. He was finally facing the truth, and though it hurt, it also gave him hope. "You're not alone in this," Clara added softly, her voice warm with reassurance. "You never were." Ethan nodded, the sincerity in his eyes shining through. "I know, Mom, and I'm sorry for everything." Clara smiled gently, her hand still holding his. "We'll get through this together." For the first time in days, Ethan felt like he could finally take the first step toward redemption. And in that moment, he knew it wouldn't be easy. But with Clara by his side, with her quiet strength and unwavering support, he was ready to face the road ahead. The journey of healing had begun. The days following Christmas felt like a slow, deliberate turning of a page, like the world was shifting back into balance, one quiet step at a time. Ethan had moved into his new apartment, the small two-bedroom unit that Clara had gifted him as a stepping stone. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was his, free from the weight of debts and lies that had once bound him. The air was lighter now, and with each passing day, the wounds that had festered between mother and son were beginning to heal, though there was still much work ahead. Clara sat in her living room, her knitting needles clicking together rhythmically. She was making a blanket for her grandson, Noah, who was now 2 years old, a lively bundle of energy who had brought a new joy into her life. She had decided that from now on, her focus would be on the things that truly mattered: family, legacy, and the empire she had built not just in business, but in love and sacrifice. Her empire was thriving. Clara's business, Clara's Couture, continued to flourish, her stores more popular than ever. She had expanded her investment portfolio, making shrewd, thoughtful choices that had paid off over the years. Her legacy, built from humble beginnings, was a testament to her strength and determination. But beyond the numbers, it was the bond she had with Ethan that had been the greatest gift of all. The two of them had spent hours together, rebuilding not just their relationship but their trust in one another. They talked about everything: family, business, life. There was a newfound honesty between them, a raw, vulnerable honesty that had been absent for far too long. Ethan had changed. He was still the man she had raised, but now he was more grounded, more self-aware. He had gone through the fire, and he had come out stronger not just for himself, but for the family that he had once allowed to slip away. Sophia, too, was beginning to change, though her journey was much more complex. After the fallout, she had retreated into herself for a while, her pride wounded, her plans crumbling. But as the months went by, she started to see the cracks in the life she had tried so hard to control. She had attended therapy, as Clara had suggested, and though it hadn't been easy, she slowly began to confront the insecurities that had driven her. She had begun working on her own self-worth, independent of the status and control she once sought through others. Sophia had reached out to Clara a few times, always with the same polite distance. Their conversations were brief, but there was a subtle shift in the air, a recognition that both women had been caught in the same storm, one that had torn through their lives, leaving a path of destruction in its wake. The resentment and anger between them hadn't vanished, but there was an unspoken understanding now. They were both mothers, after all. They both loved Ethan, and they both wanted what was best for him. One Saturday afternoon, Clara found herself in her garden, the late spring sunshine warming her skin as she trimmed the roses that had bloomed with the promise of a new season. Ethan had stopped by earlier, bringing Noah to visit. The boy had run straight to her, throwing his tiny arms around her legs in a hug so tight it almost made her knees buckle. She had held him in her arms, feeling the weight of motherhood and love all over again, knowing that this was her future, the future that she would fight for with everything she had. As she worked in the garden, Clara couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. The path had been long and fraught with pain, but they had emerged from it, stronger, more united. She had stood her ground when it mattered, never losing sight of the values that had carried her through life. Dignity, family, the importance of truth. These were the pillars that had sustained her through every trial, every betrayal. And now, they were the foundation of the life she was rebuilding. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. She looked up, expecting to see Ethan, but it was Sophia who stepped out of the car, holding a small bag of groceries. Clara's heart gave a little lurch, but she didn't let her surprise show. Instead, she walked calmly toward the gate to greet her. Sophia looked up as Clara approached, a slight, almost hesitant smile on her face. She was dressed simply, in a comfortable dress and a light sweater, her hair tied back in a loose bun. She looked different somehow, softer, as though the weight of the world wasn't constantly pressing down on her anymore. "Hi, Clara," Sophia said, her voice uncharacteristically gentle. Clara smiled, the warmth in her eyes unmistakable. "Sophia, how are you?" Sophia hesitated for a moment before answering. "I'm getting there, slowly." Clara nodded, a small, knowing smile tugging at her lips. "We all are, aren't we?" Sophia shifted uncomfortably, then took a deep breath. I've been thinking about everything that happened. I owe you an apology. I was wrong. I've made mistakes. And I hurt you, hurt Ethan. I was selfish. I just wanted things to be perfect. But I didn't understand that perfection isn't about control. It's about being real. Clara looked at her, her gaze steady and calm. Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know. Sophia looked away for a moment, as though gathering the courage to continue. I know I've made a mess of things, and I've been, well, working on myself. I want to change. I want to be better for Ethan, for Noah, for myself. Clara nodded thoughtfully. It's a long road, Sophia, but you're on the right path. Just take it one step at a time. Sophia gave her a soft smile, a trace of hope in her eyes. I'm trying. The two women stood there for a moment, the silence between them no longer uncomfortable, but filled with a sense of mutual understanding. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt like she was seeing Sophia not as an adversary, but as someone who was learning, just as she had once learned. Would you like some tea? Clara asked, her voice kind, inviting. Sophia hesitated, then nodded. I'd like that. As they walked together toward the house, Clara's heart swelled with something unexpected, a sense of peace. It wasn't a resolution, not yet, but it was a beginning. A new chapter for all of them, where the truth, the real truth, would be the foundation of the future. Later that afternoon, Clara sat at her kitchen table, sipping tea with Sophia as they talked about life, family, and the lessons they had learned. Clara realized that even in the most difficult moments, there was always room for growth, for change, for healing. Ethan had stopped by to see them both, and as he sat down beside them, his hand resting gently on Sophia's, Clara couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope for what was to come. This was not the end of the road. It was just the beginning. They would continue to rebuild, to grow, and to heal. And in that moment, Clara knew that the legacy she had worked so hard to build, the empire of love, sacrifice, and dignity, was secure. It would continue to thrive, not just in the businesses she had built, but in the lives of those she loved most. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the garden, Clara sat back in her chair, feeling the weight of the past lift, replaced by a quiet, peaceful sense of resolution. The road ahead was uncertain, but she was no longer afraid. She had already weathered the storm, and now she was ready for whatever came next.